Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that every toilet, bathroom, sewer, and toilet paper roll on Earth had suddenly disappeared. No flush, no bathroom door, no privacy, and definitely no arguing about whether you should sit or stand. For most of human history, that argument didn't even exist, because our ancestors had a much bigger problem. Where are we going to go? Thousands of years ago, there was no porcelain throne waiting patiently in the corner. If nature called, you didn't walk into a bathroom. You walked outside, and depending on where and when you lived, that could mean a field, a forest, a riverbank, a pit, or a specially designed communal toilet. So here's the strange question. When humans eventually started building toilets, did men and women use them differently? And even more interesting, were ancient men already standing while ancient women were sitting? The answer is much messier than you might expect. And no, we're not talking about the mess on the floor. Let's go back thousands of years. Before modern plumbing, humans had already figured out something incredibly important. Waste has to go somewhere. Early settlements couldn't simply pretend it didn't exist. As populations became larger, human waste became a serious problem. So people began creating designated places for it. Some ancient communities used simple pits. Others developed surprisingly sophisticated drainage and sanitation systems. And eventually, civilizations started building actual toilets. But here's where our modern imagination can get us into trouble. When we picture an ancient toilet, we might imagine something that looks vaguely like the toilets we have today. It usually didn't. There was no shiny porcelain bowl, no automatic flush, and certainly no tiny button that makes everything disappear while you stand there wondering where the water came from. Ancient toilets could be extremely simple. Sometimes they were basically holes or seats positioned over a pit, and in some civilizations, toilets became part of larger sanitation systems. One famous example comes from the Roman world. Romans built public latrines where several people could sit beside one another. Yes, beside one another. If you think sharing a bathroom with your family is awkward, imagine going to the bathroom and discovering that your neighbor is already sitting 3 inches away. No walls, no private cubicle. Just you, your neighbor, and the world's most uncomfortable small talk. Nice weather. Yep. Lovely sandals. Thanks. And somehow, nobody thought this was weird. But these public toilets reveal something important. Ancient people weren't necessarily thinking about bathrooms in the same way we do. Privacy wasn't always the priority. Practicality was. And when it came to the actual position people used, there was another major factor: anatomy. Men and women don't have identical urinary anatomy. The urethra, the tube that carries urine out of the body, is shorter in women and longer in men. But that doesn't mean ancient women had one universal position, while ancient men had another. The environment mattered, culture mattered, clothing mattered, and perhaps most importantly, what kind of toilet you were using mattered. If you're standing outside in a forest, you don't need a toilet designed specifically for sitting. But if someone builds a stone or wooden seat over a pit, suddenly sitting becomes a very convenient option. And this is where the ancient world becomes surprisingly familiar, because humans have always been very good at one thing: making complicated explanations for very simple bathroom decisions. And eventually, people even started debating whether one position was healthier than another. Thousands of years later, scientists would still be asking almost exactly the same question, except now they had laboratories, medical equipment, and statistics, because apparently humanity looked at the bathroom and thought, you know what this needs? Research. And that research produced a surprising result. For healthy men, scientific studies don't show a clear medical winner between sitting and standing. But for men who have certain urinary problems, sitting may have an advantage. A systematic review combining 11 studies found that healthy men had very similar urinary measurements, whether they sat or stood. But men with lower urinary tract symptoms tended to leave less urine in the bladder when sitting. So the ancient argument wasn't really, which position is the correct one? The better question is, what position works best for the person, the toilet, and the situation? And that takes us back to our ancestors. Because long before doctors measured urine flow, long before scientists compared bladder emptying, and long before somebody invented a toilet seat, humans had already been experimenting with the simplest bathroom technology imaginable: their own bodies. But there's still one huge mystery. If men and women have different anatomy, and ancient toilets were so different from ours, why did sitting become so common for women, while standing became so associated with men in many modern societies? The answer takes us from ancient survival, to clothing, to culture, and eventually, to the strange evolution of the modern bathroom. And that's where things get really interesting. By the time we reach ancient Rome, the bathroom story gets seriously weird. Because the Romans didn't just build toilets, they built some public toilets. And when I say public, I mean public. Imagine walking into what looks like a stone room, only to discover a long bench with holes cut into it, no private cubicles, no locked doors, and sometimes several people sitting next to each other. Basically, the Roman version of, hey, how was your day? Except nobody wanted to answer that question. Archaeological evidence shows that Roman public latrines could have multiple seats arranged together, while Roman sanitation also included sewers and water systems. And here's where our male versus female mystery gets interesting. The Romans didn't necessarily organize bathrooms bathroom life according to the strict men's room, women's room system we're familiar with today. There is evidence that some public latrines were not separated by gender, although exactly who used particular facilities and how often women used them is difficult to determine from the archaeological evidence. So imagine being a Roman woman walking toward one of these places. You see a row of seats, you see other people, and you think, actually, I'll wait. Because although Roman society could be surprisingly relaxed about bodily functions, public latrines weren't necessarily comfortable or desirable places for everyone. We also have evidence for private toilets in homes, meaning not every Roman had to use a giant communal bathroom. And this is an important lesson when talking about ancient history. We can't assume one bathroom habit applied to every man or every woman. Ancient people lived across enormous regions and thousands of years. A Roman soldier wasn't living like an Egyptian farmer. An aristocratic woman wasn't living like a poor laborer, and someone in a crowded city had completely different bathroom options from someone living in a rural settlement. So when somebody says, ancient men always stood, or ancient women always sat, you should probably raise one eyebrow, because history rarely gives us answers that neat. But there is one thing we can say with much more confidence. The design of the toilet strongly influenced how people used it. If you've got a long stone bench with a hole in it, well, the toilet has already made an executive decision. You're sitting, but standing to urinate could still happen in other settings. And ancient toilets weren't always designed only for one type of bathroom activity. Some facilities had arrangements that allowed different ways of using the space. So the question wasn't necessarily, are you team sit or team stand? It was more like, congratulations, you found the bathroom. Please work with what civilization has provided. And then there's the science. Because while ancient people didn't have modern urology departments, their bodies worked according to the same basic anatomy ours do. The bladder stores urine. The bladder muscle contracts during urination. And the urinary outlet has to relax enough for urine to pass. Men and women have different urinary anatomy, including a much shorter urethra in women. But anatomy doesn't automatically dictate one universal bathroom position. Position, clothing, toilet design, mobility, culture, and personal habits can all influence what someone does. And there's another fascinating clue hiding in the history of clothing. Think about ancient garments. A modern person can walk into a bathroom wearing trousers, unzip them, sit down, and get on with life. Ancient clothing could be completely different. Long robes, tunics, wrapped garments, and other styles could change how easy or awkward different positions were. So bathroom habits weren't just about anatomy. They were also about technology and fashion. Yes, your pants may have influenced civilization, not exactly the sentence you expected from a history documentary. And then came another major change. As cities became more complicated, humans became increasingly interested in moving waste away from where people lived. The Romans became particularly skilled at building aqueducts, drains, sewers, and latrines. Suddenly, the bathroom wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was part of an entire urban system. Water could move, waste could be carried away, and toilets could be connected to larger drainage networks. Humanity had officially entered the era of, let's make the poop disappear somewhere else. A magnificent engineering achievement. And yet, we still hadn't solved the argument over sitting versus standing. In fact, thousands of years later, scientists would put modern men into controlled studies and ask essentially the same ridiculous-sounding question. And that's when the ancient bathroom mystery comes full circle, because when researchers actually measured what happens during urination, the answer wasn't, standing is for men, or sitting is always healthier. The evidence is much more interesting. For healthy men, studies generally haven't found a major difference between sitting and standing in important measures of urination. But among men with lower urinary tract symptoms, sitting has been associated with better bladder emptying. So maybe our ancestors weren't secretly missing some magical ancient bathroom technique. Maybe they were simply doing what humans have always done, using whatever position made sense for the situation. And if that sounds disappointingly simple, wait until you hear what happened when bathrooms became more private. Because once humans started separating themselves from everyone else while using the toilet, something changed. The bathroom stopped being a social space. It became a private space. And eventually, the modern toilet gave men and women something ancient Romans could only dream about, a door. But that little door changed bathroom culture more than you might think. So, after thousands of years of humans digging holes, building stone toilets, sharing latrines, and apparently having absolutely no problem sitting next to their neighbors, we finally arrive at the modern bathroom, and something strange has happened. Walk into a modern Western men's bathroom, and you'll usually find two options, a toilet and a urinal. Meanwhile, women's bathrooms are overwhelmingly designed around sitting. So how did this become the norm? Was it biology? Was it ancient tradition? Or did humans simply spend centuries building bathrooms that told everyone how they were supposed to use them? The answer is a little bit of everything. Let's start with anatomy. Men and women have different urinary anatomy, but anatomy doesn't automatically determine whether someone must sit or stand. The human body is perfectly capable of adapting to different positions. And that's why you can find different bathroom customs across different cultures. In fact, the scientific evidence doesn't support the idea that standing is somehow naturally better for men. A systematic review of 11 studies found that among healthy men, sitting and standing produced very similar results for urine flow, urination time, and the amount of urine left in the bladder. So if you're a healthy man who prefers standing, congratulations. Science isn't coming for your bathroom routine. But if you're a man with certain urinary symptoms, the story changes. The same review found that men with lower urinary tract symptoms had less urine remaining in the bladder after sitting than after standing, about 25 milliliters less on average. That doesn't mean every man should immediately abandon standing. It simply means the body doesn't always behave identically in every condition. And that's actually a pretty important lesson, because the ancient world didn't have a universal bathroom rule. Neither does the modern world. Different societies developed different habits. In some places, sitting or squatting is common for both men and women. In many Western countries, standing became strongly associated with men, and the modern bathroom helped reinforce that distinction. Think about the urinal. It's basically a machine that says, standing is expected here. No chair, no toilet seat. Just walk up, use it, wash your hands, and leave. Very efficient, very practical, and absolutely terrible if you're someone who wanted to sit down and contemplate the meaning of life. But there's another piece of the puzzle: privacy. Ancient public toilets could be extremely communal. Medieval toilets could be simple wooden seats over pits or shafts, sometimes with little privacy. Modern bathrooms gradually became much more private. Doors, cubicles, separate men's and women's rooms, individual toilets. The bathroom went from being a place where people could gather to one of the most private rooms in the building. And that changed the social meaning of bathroom habits. Today, most people don't think, which archaeological tradition am I continuing? They simply think, I need to use the bathroom, which is probably for the best. But here's one of my favorite parts of this entire story. Ancient Romans were already thinking about sanitation on a surprisingly large scale. Rome developed major sewer infrastructure, including the famous Cloaca Maxima, and had workers involved in maintaining sanitation systems. And some Roman latrines even had water channels running nearby. So thousands of years ago, humans were already asking questions that sound surprisingly modern. How do we remove waste? How do we keep cities cleaner? How do we design toilets? And apparently, how many people can we fit onto one bench? The answer to that last question was far too many. But there's still one final question. What about ancient women? Did they sit? Did they squat? Did they stand? The honest historical answer is, it depended. There wasn't one universal ancient female bathroom position. Different cultures had different toilets, clothing, customs, and environments. And the same is true for men. Ancient history isn't a giant instruction manual saying, men do this, women do that. People adapted. They used whatever their environment and culture made practical. And that's why the modern debate over sitting versus standing is actually much newer than it feels. We're not continuing some perfectly preserved ancient tradition. We're simply using bathrooms designed by the societies we live in. So after thousands of years, what does science actually tell us? For healthy men, there's no clear medical winner between sitting and standing. For men experiencing certain urinary problems, sitting may help empty the bladder more effectively. For women, sitting is the usual position in modern toilets. But the broader story is about anatomy, culture, clothing, toilet design, and circumstance, not some ancient universal rule. And perhaps that's the funniest part. Humans have built aqueducts, sewers, public toilets, private bathrooms, flush toilets, automatic toilets, smart toilets that probably know more about us than some of our relatives. And after all that technological progress, we're still debating, should I sit or stand? Our ancestors had stone toilets. We have heated toilet seats. Our ancestors had communal latrines. We have bathrooms with Wi-Fi. Our ancestors had to figure out where the waste was going. We have to figure out who forgot to replace the toilet paper. Different problems. Same species. So the next time you walk into a bathroom, remember, you're not just using a toilet, you're participating in one of humanity's strangest technological journeys. A journey that began with, find a place to go, and somehow ended with, please select your preferred bathroom position. History is weird, and honestly, I'm glad we don't have to use the Roman version anymore.